Hello, Amy.
Amy, we can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Good afternoon, Amy. We can't hear you either. No, we can't hear you. Good afternoon, Amy. If you can unmute yourself, because it shows muted.
There we go.
That's better. That's
Oh
better.
my goodness! Wow. Thank you, everyone. My apologies. The techie is always the most tech challenged in the end. And greetings, colleagues and co-presenters. And thank you so much for making time to attend this very important reflection on the animation, gaming, and VFX industry. We're here today to speak about how we can elevate the animation industry at large, inclusive of gaming and VFX, and how we can actually do it together. I don't want to spend too much time or take much time from the true experts who are our panelists over here, and I would just like to do some housekeeping, and I'll introduce things to keep the program moving. Sorry, we are starting a little bit late. Please bear with us as we make some time back. But fundamentally, there is huge potential in the South African animation, gaming, and we're here because we know that, and indeed the South African Cultural Observatory has conducted 3 sets of research in the last 5 years on animation as a turnkey industry. But we also know that there are significant challenges, right? These include limited funding and resources, the very high level of skills that are needed for this industry, and an extreme skills shortage that we face. Indeed, there's a market size and distribution challenge, which we are looking at. And then there's infrastructure, from the studios to the technology, and sometimes the prohibitive costs of actually entering this industry. And finally, from a competition point of view, the enormous competition from well-established industry and foreign content. But we have great stories to tell, and the success of many of our animated films, and indeed our series and programming, and indeed the quality of our advertising showcases this. We also have the huge advantage of cultural diversity, our ability to collaborate internationally, and the fact that there are some established training and education programs that can be scaled, a general government support for the animation industry in terms of theoretical support, and the growth of digital and streaming services has opened up marketplaces, and emerging technology is helping us. So we are there. It might be dark in some areas, but there's also a lot of potential in other areas. And today we want to speak about how we can do that together. So I'd like to just say that in terms of the housekeeping, if you have any questions, and my colleagues on the other side you're also welcome to jump in if I miss any of the rules, but please engage in the chat. We'll note down your questions and cover them throughout the session. Just to give you a lay of the land, our program first it's my duty to welcome you and thank you for coming, and give a short introduction to the South African Cultural Observatory, and then I'll hand over to Isabel Rourke from Animation South Africa, who will introduce you, I think, to quite a well-known association of animators in South Africa that is doing incredible work, and indeed a survey at the moment, which is due to close towards the end of this week, on the industry's challenges and areas for feedback, so that we can flow this back into a policy feedback loop, and indeed help Animation South Africa play the role of advocates for the industry in South Africa. And Isabel will also then continue and just kind of do a scene setter for us. And then I'll hand over to my colleague Sinatemba Vachima, who will present for about 10 or more minutes on gaming in South Africa, research that we've done, and South Africa's animation industry and ecosystem analysis. That kind of sets the scene. And then we'll get into a policy discussion on how we can elevate the industry together with Dr. Chepo Maka, Kabelo, Maka, Moka Janssen-Van Deline Fourie, and Nika Klute. And then finally, we'll open it up to the floor, where we will hear from you about your challenges, expectations. So without further ado, we welcome you as the South African Cultural Observatory and Animation South Africa. For those of you who don't know, the South African Cultural Observatory has been operating since 2015-16 officially, and our role is to influence policy, shape the research agenda for the country, to develop a baseline cultural information system where we're able to look at South Africa's cultural economy and measure it, and add factual data-based information to the body of research under development across South Africa, and bring cohesion to the sector through data, good information. Indeed, before the South African Cultural Observatory was in place, we didn't have certain key pieces of information, such as the fact that we now know that the creative and cultural economy contributes around 3% to national GDP in South Africa. This is significant. It's on par with agriculture. And as a result, there is a huge policy incentive for government across the board, not only the Departments of Sports, Arts and Culture, but also for the Departments of Trade, Industry and Commodities and other government departments to support the creative economy on a much higher level. We also know that we employ around 1 million people with the capacity to actually absorb a lot, almost double or up to triple that number in the creative sector with the right investments and the right support. And part of our job is to look into different sectors, and some of the work that we have done has been specific to the animation and gaming sector, but we will hear more about that from my colleagues. So right now, and I trust that Isabel is in the room, I will hand over to the head of Animation South Africa, Isabel Rock. Marcy, could you please let Isabel?
Sorry, Amy, cut off. Could I please let Isabel do what?
Take the floor or
Oh,
unmute
okay.
her?
Sure, I'll do that. I don't know if she's here. I don't see her in the list of participants unless I think I see her. I'll unmute.
Yeah. Okay, well, what I suggest while we're waiting for Isabel to come on is perhaps if we could just maybe start with Sinatemba, who is from he's one of our researchers at the and we can come back to Isabel to set the scene for animation and gaming in South Africa. But Sinatemba Vachima is going to share with us some of the research and data and information that's come out of our own body of research as the South African Cultural Observatory on gaming in South Africa and in general about South Africa's animation ecosystem. Sinatemba, are you ready to go?
Yes, are you going to share the screen or must I share my presentation?
If you could share yours, I think it's easier. You can have better control over it then.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we've got your screen. Go ahead.
Okay, yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Sinatemba, and I'm one of the researchers here at SACO. Over the past 2 years, we've done 2 papers that are focusing on animation in South Africa. We also did one in 2019 that was focusing on the online gaming revenue. That's also available on the website. If you are interested in reading those papers, we can send them to you via email, or you can download them on our website. SA's animation industry and ecosystems analysis. This paper was done in 2021, and in going about doing the research for the paper, we used 5 data sets from South African animation companies. We also did 3 case studies. We did research on existing literature, comparing SA animation as well as animation just around the world. We also did some interviews with 7 industry stakeholders who are market leaders. We call those stakeholders the Big 7. I think Nick was one of the guys that we had done an interview with. And then we also did a mapping of the studios in SA, as well as we did a mapping of the markets where developers and distributors meet all over the world, and which markets or film festivals do South African studios normally go to, and seeking for funding as well as collaborations. When you look at the characteristics of the South African animation industry. We saw that the South African animation industry was only established in the early 90s, and it is still in its beginning phases. But despite this, the quality and quantity of the SA animated films and services has increased over the last decades. It was estimated by the paper that we did in 2019, from that paper, that the turnover of the gaming and animation sector was 476 million in 2019. As I said, that paper is accessible on our website. We can also send it to you guys. In 2018, the South African gaming and animation sector created just over 1,200 direct jobs, which was 310 in gaming firms, and then the rest 768 in animation, and then we had 125 who are hybrid companies, so the people were basically working from home. This also saw an increase from the 225 game industry jobs that was created in 2015, according to a report that was done in 2016 by IES. And this again shows that the animation sector in South Africa is growing. And as I've said before, that we also looked at the comparison or literature from other industries across the globe, and we saw that Hello?
Can you move slides? Sorry, and I don't think you're sharing properly yet. So if you are moving, it's not moving between the slides. Sorry to interrupt. I think you were
I'm still on slide 5. The characters.
Oh, you are. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you just go into share mode, please, if you don't mind, the screen share mode at the bottom, presentation mode. Sorry.
Okay, let me check. Can you see down
at the bottom? There's a presentation mode next to the Zoom slider.
Presentation mode.
Next to the Zoom slider is that presentation button. Down.
Yeah. Trying to click on it. Can you see it now? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, boy. There we go.
Okay, yeah. Sorry for that. Yeah.
All good.
Yeah, when we look at existing literature in the animation in comparison to South Africa, we saw that the role of TV has originally been seen as a threat to cinemas, and therefore animation films, it appears that it provided a platform for animated services which had not been possible before. This helped further the popularization of animation and enabled it in the Japanese animation sector. So the Japanese are one of the leading countries when it comes to animation. The government also played a huge role in Japan as they supported the animation sector. Some call it the tool of propaganda. Also, in India, it is used as a tool in the education sector, which embedded animation in other spheres of life that can assist in growing audiences for artistic animation products. Both Japan and India appear to have sizable domestic audiences, which is not the case in South Africa, but we'll see that in the report. Animation products they produce are made in their native language, and limited amounts of imported American animation products are used by television stations or local online streaming platforms. Merchandise linked to IP content generates a substantial amount of revenue that can support further animation products. High-tech cinemas in India have led to an increase in appetite for animation in that country. Relating to the above, in that country, there appears to be an emphasis on more rounded, digital-driven education in creative fields. What were the main findings of the reports? Most of the animation studios were not as badly affected by COVID as live action film ones were, as they were able to continue working from home. The decrease of the rand value also had an impact in the outsourcing of production in South Africa, which attracted foreign companies to come and partner with South African animation studios. South Africa's animation sector is still small and is struggling to break into large form original content creation. only a small percentage of South African studios are producing animated films and services. These studios tend to be the large ones, which we again call them the Big Seven, with the highest profiles, evidencing the industry to be one that conforms to winner-takes-all model. From the research, we were able to map 44 films and services that were produced between 2010 and 2021, which were produced by 20 studios in SA. The overall number of studios in SA was 69, and then 29% of those studios had produced the services were from the animation sector. The majority of animation companies focus on client-based work for commercials and marketing purposes. This was seen when we were doing interviews with the Big Seven. Difficulties involved in securing funding or partnerships to realize original animated content has seen most studios offer a wide range of services to generate an income. 32% visualization services, exemplar videos, and other educational thematic products. 16% of companies produce animation for or are involved in the gaming industry. So they do both, they either doing gaming and also a part of animation. When you look at the mapping, the majority of companies and educational institutions offering qualification and training in animation are located in Gauteng. We have 38 companies and 11 education institutions. And then the Western Cape had 30 companies and 16 education institutions. So most of the clustering is between Gauteng and Western Cape, where we also find the Big Seven. The production of animated films and services is dominated by 3 major players, which is Triggerfish, Mind's Eye Creative, and Sunrise Productions. So these are a number of films that each studio has been able to produce over the years from 2010 until 2021. So that Triggerfish has produced 12, and then Mind's Eyes produced 7, Sunrise produced 5, and then Pixcom 3, Mike Scott 3, as well as Minco Creative also produced 3. As I said, most of the animation products that are being made are aimed at TV or online streaming audiences. When you look at the production of those films and videos, we saw that 60% of them are services, and then 38% of those production are from films. The constraints that are impacting the animation industry, as films and services are costly and high risk to produce, they require a number of funders. A shrinking economy does not create fertile conditions for these kinds of local funders. One of the constraints of that, the economic impact that is currently happening, the economic situation that is currently happening in South Africa is not good for the animation sector. An assessment of the state and depth of available public funding for the South African animation industry, both government and non-profit, is limited. We also saw that most of them require a lot of information. So there's a lot of red tape, and when one is applying for such funding, some of this funding are only aimed at films, so that which go to the big production companies and not necessarily animation or animation studios, sorry. Local studios can't compete with those in other countries that are subsidized by their governments. And I've said before, India and Japan were one of the countries who heavily funded the animation sector, and then that led to them having dominating the animation industry across the world. 58% of the funding made available to South Africans animation industry comes from the private sector and self-funding by animation studios, while the government and the public sector account for only 20% of the total funding. Education and syllabus offered by animation studios and departments are not in sync with the current working practices and technologies, which is one of the issues that Nick had raised in our last workshop in Cape Town during the Africa Games Week, where it seems that what the universities are doing or education animation schools are doing is not correlated to what the animation studios are currently thinking. The skills are not what they are requiring for them to employ the graduates. Education professionals argue that poor visual and computer literacy at school levels puts most of their students at a disadvantage and has shaped a syllabus to compensate for this and limits the level they should be reaching after a 3-year course. Late approvals for CETA grants and limited eligibility are reversing gains this scheme made in bridging the seemingly widening gap between education institutions and the industry. So what are the drivers for animation? The major driver is globalization, which offers developing countries opportunities to move up the value chain and to project to an international audience and an image of South Africa that would encourage investment in other sectors of the economy. Growth of the South African animation industry is tied to its depreciating rand, which makes this country a destination for foreign companies to outsource production to, whether that be to studios or freelancers. Through our database that I mentioned before, we are able to draw the segment or the value chain of the animation ecosystem chain of the animation sector, which starts from being self-taught or going from institution, and then it can be a big studio, a small studio, freelancer, and then all of that ends up to your audience. So every player in the ecosystem chain has a value that it adds to the production of the film or of the game. This is the mapping of the markets that happen across the world, where the distributors normally meet with animation studios, either to fund the studio or to be in collaboration. This is also available on the research paper that we've done. When you look at gaming in South Africa, we're looking at the producers and consumers side. So what methodology did we use for this report? This report also builds from the existing studies that we have at SACO, the one on gaming revenue that was done in 2018-19, and also the one that I've just done, the ecosystems, which was done in 2021. As I've mentioned that we have the Big 7, so we took an in-depth analysis of the Big 7 and had a greater chat with them on how they managed to generate their revenue as producers and where they produce the films for or the games for. Also did case studies, also did some interviews, and also did some secondary data, which is available on Stats SA and also on DTI. We also took some consumer surveys from Stats SA and DTI, as well as primary data that was sourced from Apple and Google Play. When we look at the gaming industry, the local gaming sector is in its infancy, with most companies under 10 years of age. Primary data collected on STEM shows that in the online PC gaming sphere, America claims the majority share in terms of audience. We also linked this to the STEM, which I was talking about, which was done in 2013. That's where data from South Africa was starting to be filtering out to the industry. Nyamcorp, which was founded in 2015, has only produced one game to date, but has recently landed their biggest publishing deal for a South African game. Quarter Center Forward 2018, which was awarded a desktop Dungeons at the 2011 Independent Games Festival, and by 2016 had reportedly made in excess of 9 million. Free Live's leading studio with 5 published games, among them Vorforce, which has clocked sales amounting to $1 million. So when you look at the global market, this was sourced from Global Games Market. We saw that the total revenue that is available to the gaming sector is over $175 billion, and the majority of that revenue goes to that Asia Pacific region, followed by your North America, which is the US, and then we get Europe, the Middle East, and then Latin America. When we look at Africa, the African gaming market is expected to double its revenue in the next 5 years, from just over 1 billion to 2 billion by 2026, which is a 15.2% increase in terms of revenue. So when you look at the producers, so the producers can generate premium games, a model where the consumer pays an upfront once-off fee for PC or console. South African studios are largely creating or servicing the indie games niche market, a term used to apply to those games created by small teams with modest budgets. No AAA games co-produced. The majority of studios, foot one of the foot 9 tracked in the study, are defined as micro enterprises. The skill levels of the staff are the main assets of the studio. When you look at the consumers, only 10% of the population has access to a fixed internet connection, which is generally a prerequisite for playing any PC or console online game. Given the stats around South Africa's sinking middle class and the income brackets that define this group, the market for online gaming is relatively small. When you look at the gaming studios in South Africa, their funding here, you see that the first company was found in 1999, and then over the years, we've seen an increase of companies that have been found. And then if you look at 2011, that's when the South African gaming industry started to getting more and more studios being found in the industry. So what are the characteristics of the gaming industry? It is a highly competitive, globalized industry. A surplus of new games has led to the notion of an indie opolypsy. Producing games is expensive and time-consuming. Returns on investment follow a long tail pattern. It can take up to 10 years to achieve a game's full monetary rewards. So in the first years, during the development stages, a studio might not realize any returns on the game that they've produced. Creating IP is high risk due to the cost. A return on investment is not instant, but rather depends on a sustained stream of consumers over a long period of time. This is a field driven by and reliant upon different groups of specialists. This is a data-driven industry. Interest is measured in the numbers of downloads and sales rather than in the quality of the artistry, narrative, or technical nous of the developers. Gaming is therefore completely audience-centric. Their engagement is not only measured in sales and downloads, but also in their interaction with the product, which fits into the creation and updates. As such, this is a highly participatory medium. The Big Seven, as I've said, that we identified the Big Seven studios in SA. These studios exclude companies producing casino games and esports due to the fact that the business models and economic chains are tied to a gambling one, and in the latter case remains a micro cluster of economic activities. So the Big Seven, when we interviewed them, we saw that only one service-based company contracts for local businesses. All service-based studios are dependent on revenue and clients from the US or Europe. Service-based have a desire to produce their own their own IP. Skills deficiency, main constraints factor. Financing of games, their publishers are self-taught only when a successful game and there's no local content. Audience is elsewhere. 90% of the audience for this Big Seven is in North America. When you look at the Big Seven, 58 of them had produced, so when you look at them, they've produced 58 games that they own, and most of those games, Watches 140, are service games, so they didn't own their IP. Main fundings, US-based companies are profiting from South African studios in terms of their tech tools and platforms for dissemination. As it was said before, because of the rent value, it is much cheaper for big companies to come and collaborate with studios in South Africa based due to the fact that the rand is low compared to the US dollar. Those studios using a third-party publisher are losing up to 6% of their game royalties, 30% to the publisher, and an additional 30% to STEM or other platforms. STEM is a video game digital distributor service that was developed by Valve's Group. So if you have a third party, some of that profit goes to them. This highlights the importance of selling volumes by creating games that have a very wide appeal. These gaming economies draw attention to both the advantages of being part of a global ecosystem, gaining access to audience that do not exist in your own country, but in doing so, revenue generated from IP is flowing across the borders too. So when you look at the share of gamers across the world, we saw that a greater penetration of gaming among young generations is attributed to them having grown up connecting through digital networks and engaging with digital and interactive entertainment. Even though most of the gamers are from the younger generation, the population of game is across all generations, as gaming is attractive to everyone, as almost half of the baby boomers engage with gaming. When you look at the population that was broken down by State SA, we saw that Generation Alpha and Generation Z were the ones that were engaging in gaming more compared to the other generations. As we've mentioned before, that playing PC and online games requires you to have a stable internet connection. This is the analysis of a stable internet at home or anywhere else across provinces. We saw that when you look at South Africa as a whole, only 10.4% of the population has internet, a stable internet at home. And then when you look at elsewhere, that can be in your local city or local municipality or even in universities, 77.5% of the population does have access to that internet. When you look at developer by country or origin, we are talking about where the gaming was produced, not where or who produced the gaming. Because if you check, some of these gamers or developers can develop games in other countries, like Deep Rock had developed a game for a Swedish company, but because it was developed in Sweden, the gaming and IP remained as a Swedish company's IP. So most of the developers are from Ireland. That's where the countries that produces most of the games. Ireland, followed by the UK and Finland. Then we have America, and then Sweden, Turkey, Singapore, and Israel. Also, when we look at the gaming now in terms of who produces them, as in where the person comes from, we saw that 53% of the people who produce or develop games are from the United States, which is followed by England or UK, which at 20%. In conclusion, South African gamers have a preference for playing online, playing on mobile devices. This is not only shaped by the fact that the penetration of smartphones has been high, but because there is more and better connection to the internet through smartphones and cell phones. Only 10% of the population has access to a fixed internet connection, which is generally a prerequisite for PC and console online gaming. Not enough studios have sufficient experience or expertise in generating original content for films or series. Revisions to the Copyright Amendment Bill to protect original content creators is at this stage hampering international partnership from entering into partnership with some of the South African studios. Internships should become an obligation part of an education in animation and might need to be introduced much earlier in a student's curriculum. The lack of local funding for games has to some degree left some South African studios either unable to generate their own IP, shifting their focus to service work, or beholden to publishers in the US. Lack of transformation on access to capital. Disconnect between local consumers and gaming industry. Globalized industry, serious games, face-to-face access as well as investment has been there. However, the investment is coming in two stages. That is your prototype as well as your proven testing. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sino. Really appreciate that. I think you can stop sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we really appreciate that. Every time I see these stats and the information, I'm reminded of both the power and the potential of the industry, but also so many of the barriers for growth, which need to be approached as a systemic whole, and kind of need a whole of government, whole of society, whole of training and education approach to solve some of them. Of course, we can turn the levers in key areas, but the challenge remains that the industry has quite a few hurdles, even though there is huge demand. And I think one of those is competition. But let me not steal the thunder from the true experts on the topic. And I'd like to hand over to Isabel Rourke from the head of Animation SA to just walk us through, again, I guess, a bit of a scene setter from Animation SA's perspective, so that we are able to just open up the floor to where Animation South Africa's head is in relation to gaming and to animation and VFX in the country. Marcy, I see you're getting a nice slide up so that we're looking at something pretty. Thank you so much. Could you also just unmute or open the floor to Isabel, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We got you. Thank you.
And is my video clear? For some reason, I'm not seeing my video.
Oh, yes, we got you.
But...
Thank you. Yes.
Okay,
Looks
cool.
like a beautiful Jersey day.
Oh, it is such a beautiful Jersey day. Welcome, everyone. So just to give you a bit of a background, as I'm sure many of you know, Animation SA is the only industry body mandated to grow the animation industry, which has been around for about 17 years now, and really ramped up its impact and change in the last the last 5 years, with a lot of highlights of just the potential of what can be done and what needs to be done. And I think a big part of that has been research driven. A big thanks to our funders, GIZ, GUTA, Department of Economic Development, Department of Arts and Culture. Without these funders, we're unable to implement some of the interventions that we have been able to, from the COVID relief that impacted so profoundly on the entrepreneurs that we supported with junior animators, people who were unable to work on their private projects. And we know that IP is the big focus that we need to be developing. It's just opened up a whole new potential for these entrepreneurs. From the work that our chairman has been championing for many years in sector support, with legislation, the copyright amendment bill, that is a huge issue that needs to be unraveled. And then, of course, within my unit, the social impact and human capital innovation has really kind of allowed us to do a lot of experimentation and iteration and growing within the incubator space, within the internship space, having piloted the first incubator with 10 first-time African animated TV series producers, and 6 game developers. So that incubator is in its final year. So we're engaging in market access now in terms of securing the rest of the funding for the productions. I think one of the latest developments that we really have to address is the impact of AI. Animation is listed as one of the top industries that will be hugely disrupted by AI. So this is going to inform a big shift in our internships going forward and our incubators and some of the pipeline experiments that we're doing to reduce the budget, increase productivity. So looking at how can we basically embrace the fact that AI is here and start preparing young animators and entrepreneurs for that inevitability. And rather looking at it from a, what is the opportunity, rather looking from that than from the, what are the risks and dangers. And the reality is that AI is going to take away a lot of the jobs within the production pipeline. So the work that we've been doing around the inverted value chain, which brings everything from the end of the value chain up front into development, becomes critical at this stage, because now it looks like development is the main focus of what we'll be doing in animation, when potentially the production could be, all the technical skills in the pipeline could be replaced by AI. So in preparing for that, our internship next year is definitely going to be focused on AI and developing people who can be the enablers of AI to make the production more efficient and effective. So yeah, one of the exciting things of this year was the rollout of the social impact work, piloting it in Kliptown near Eldorado Park, Soweto, south of Johannesburg. Working with Marco van Vieren, who came on board as the education volunteer, and doing some beautiful work with young children in the community, teaching them really high level animation and just being amazed at their ability to implement some of the stuff, from walking cycles to bouncing balls. So yeah, on a holistic level, I think there's so much scope and potential for what Animation SA as an industry body can achieve. And now with our board succession, we're really looking forward to ramp up and really achieve a lot more over the next coming years. So I think I'm going to leave it there since we have a lot to get through today.
Thanks, Isabel. Thank you for putting in stock or putting in the center really the influence of AI, not only for animation and gaming, but indeed for the whole creative sector. And also thank you for contributing to the SACO's AI survey, which is also out, and maybe someone could drop that in the chat if I don't get a chance to do it as well, because we are doing a dipstick survey on the impact of animation. But 100 of the impact of AI on creative sectors, including animation. And I think it was hugely relevant what you're saying is that there is going to be value chain disruption across the board. I think this goes back to the whole question of the day, which is how do we tackle this together? Because creative industries, unlike bigger industrial industries like automotive, where the production value or the supply chain, the production chain is very obvious and physical, a lot of what we're dealing with as a creative sector is intellectual and non-visible until you start getting to a final product, and it's not visible on the side of a road. If you're driving past, you can't see animation or gaming in production necessarily, but we are huge industries that require massive skill sets, technical equipment, render farms, a whole range of things. And to be trying to scale an industry amid a massive industrial transformation is kind of a big conundrum that we need to face as an industry to navigate together and to come up with solutions together. So thank you. I think that was a very powerful introduction, and I think the work you're doing is incredible, and we'll go further. And indeed, we're going to need industry bodies like Animation SA in the future so that we can tackle this. Go ahead.
I just want to add that the opportunity with AI is that if we put our focus on development, IP development, script, artists, concept artists, storyboarding, it opens up the door to, because as a social impact organization, we've got to look at, we're about creating jobs and growing the industry, but at the same time, we have to look at creating budgets that are reasonable. And AI opens that opportunity where, with the reduced amount of time of production, we're now able to turn over a lot more content. And so really putting focus on development ensures us to have a faster production cycle and get more content out there. And with the demand for African content that has increased incredibly over the last decade, most distributors that I speak to basically says, well, if you have completed animated content, we will take it. So it's really an opportunity to speed up the amount of content that we create and create that jobs through just having a lot of IP. And then one of the other really exciting things that was achieved this year was the growth strategy in KZN. I mean, that was really groundbreaking in that we had never really zoned in on a province and drilled down to looking at how can we incorporate townships and rural communities into the animation industry, and came up with some really incredible interventions and solutions, and one that addresses an industry issue, which is the 2D, 3D issue, where the focus is on 2D, 3D, making it inaccessible because of the high machinery, etc. By bringing back, stop frame animation, charcoal animation, and the simpler forms of animation that make it easier for entry level into the industry. So a lot of exciting developments going on.
And I love your, I don't know, this might sound bad, but techno positivity. I think in the creative industries as well, technology helps us to achieve things that it can hinder us, and certainly are challenges, but it's a the production with the opportunities, and in a way the animation about animation where ideas nurturing that would be a starting point as we move into the future. And with your information, I love it. But it's helpful. But yeah, I would love to. Yeah, I see that. I would love to get into the panel discussion. And so I'll do a very short introduction on we've got the marker, and inquiry. And then I would just wanted to kick off the discussion, and Marcy, if you could just unmute all the panelists as well. And we can start. I think I'm going to ask a general question, and then I'd like each of you to respond, just to kick things off and hear briefly from you. What is your personal perspective as both an industry player, and in some cases you're wearing two hats as representative of the animation industry? What do you see the state of the animation industry currently, and the key strengths and challenges we have? Let's start with Dr. Marker.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I think one of the things that I really am glad about in the South African industry is the fact that there is some sort of government funding and there is support from the NVFs, the DTIs, the Gauteng Film Commission, the KZN Westgro, all of those. I am really appreciative of that. And also, I'm appreciative of the fact that we have an industry body that is Animation SA, and that through funding, the GIZ funding, we've been able, as emerging studios, to get interns into our studios. But more importantly, that we have increase the internship program from 3 months to 12 months. That for me is something that I've been really looking forward to, and it has happened to us now twice. And so we're grateful that now the industry is developing in that manner. In fact, in terms of weaknesses, I think my biggest concern is that we're looking at animation largely from a technical point of view, not as a business. And I'd like to have the animation industry tackle this industry as a bigger business, and to incorporate all the other facets of business that I'll probably talk about later. And in terms of the budgets for animation from the funders, we usually get very good development funding. But when it comes to production funding, I think we still need to handhold the funders and let them know that we don't, yes, we appreciate the development funding, but we need to be able to get good budgets for production funding, because animation is very expensive. So that for me would be one of the weaker points that I would want to be addressed. Thank you.
Great. I think seeing that you're both there, Kabelo, over to you.
Can you just repeat the question?
Sure, no problem. It was just about what is the current state of animation in your view, and what do you see as the key strength and the key challenge?
I think it's experiencing some measure of a boom, or at the beginning of a boom. I think our industry is just showing the great amount of potential that it has. Of course, it's helpful right now that it's fashionable to be from the African continent. So that helps in terms of getting that international exposure, recognition that we need in order to grow. I think our strength as an industry is that we just make do with what we have, and I think that is quite African in the way that we move. We just make shift. Okay, there's load shedding. Okay, I must work here. Okay, I don't have access to this software, then I'll use this free software. Okay, I only have interns for 3 months instead of 12 months. What can I do for those 3 months? So I think that's the strength of our industry. We make do with what we have until we can have better.
The weaknesses?
Oh,
the challenges.
I think you're thinking.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think Maka, would you be able to comment as well? I popped the question in the chat as well for reference if anyone wants to go back to it.
There we go. Thanks, Amy, and thanks everyone who's hosting this. Yeah, I think from an education perspective, we were, when we did because I worked with Isabel also on the KZN strategy, and the research that we did in that province, and I think KZN is a unique province in many ways, but it's also it reflects a lot of the challenges that we have nationally. We found access being very restricted into the kind of path towards education professionalization, and some of those restrictions are financial, and they're very much based on the fees that education institutions charge. I mean, I know, having worked in education in both private and public for 20 odd years, I know how much it costs to educate somebody in a field like this. So the cost of education is at the moment massive, and if we don't address that, then we're going to have this problem of education in animation remaining an expensive, privileged kind of niche field, rather than it being wide open to many talented individuals that really actually should be part of the industry and be practicing this art. And one of the principles that kind of drove our approach to the KZN strategy was also to say, well, none of this is going to work if animation remains this niche area and this practice that is seen to be for someone else. Because I think that's a big part of the problem that we encountered, is that people were saying, yeah, we know that animation is out there, but it's not for us. And so one of the things that we're looking at is, how does one engender a culture of animation that where it's understood that, you know, animation is for me. Animation is something that I can do. Animation is something that I don't need to be rich in order to access. And animation is something that I can go and do at my school. I can learn about it at my library. I can go and do it at the art center, the community hall, whatever, you know. So once those things become unlocked, we start producing in many, many small ways our own content, and the learning process, the education process isn't held just in these exclusive spaces, but it's a very distributed thing, and it becomes very, very accessible. I mean, we're talking about innovative use of technology as well. How can you learn to animate using a smartphone as your main kind of access to technology initially? So I think there's a lot of those things that need to be broken down educationally, but really it's this, it's the issue of broadening access and paths to success that I think we need to crack.
Fascinating insight, and I think probably everyone here will be in agreement, and I see one or two yeses in the group over there as well. It comes back to, and I do hope everyone can hear me with my camera off. It comes back to this idea of like, what is public in a digital space, and how do you feel part of a digital public communities that are out there, the creation communities that are saying theater, and these were spaces.
Amy, your audio is breaking up a bit again. Pardon? Not really. It's still breaking up quite a bit.
Amy, can you hear us?
Yes.
Your audio is breaking, so we cannot hear what you said.
Oh, she's written in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Hi everyone. So I'll just start on my end then. Okay, the first question was the positives, and I'm going to answer my questions from the research perspective. As BitFox, we've been working with ASA to do this census or mapping study, and I'll answer from that perspective. But I have to just add that I agree with most of what has been said so far. I've also experienced similar trends in the industry. I think the one thing that I definitely will say that has made it a lot easier for us as researchers is the fact that there's, I almost want to say it's a sense of community amongst this sector, which I haven't experienced in any other sector, where I find that people will jump in and just kind of start sharing things and communicate why this is important, regardless of whether they've been prompted or asked to do so or not. So there's that sense of community that's, and people are also incredibly responsive, and they do what is important for the industry. Which I haven't, like I said, we haven't found in other sectors where we've done research, or not to the same extent. And then, of course, this boom that you're experiencing with the sector, I think is very important, and it also creates that, I think, a sense of excitement about what's to come. And then maybe just to move on to the, not the negative, but it's, I think the thing that I want to comment on is also an opportunity. One of the things that we found is the lack of data in the industry or formalized data. So I know that SACO and a lot of other players have gone an incredibly long way to contribute to the amount of data that is available in the industry. But if you look at other more mature and larger industries, they've got a ton of benchmarking information that's available that industries will pay tons of money for that kind of information, and we don't see that yet in this industry. So it's not a negative, it's also an opportunity, but that makes you feel like you're kind of starting from scratch. But like I said, it's not, it's also an opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me a bit better now.
Yes, we can.
Much better, Amy.
Yay! Thanks. Cell phones are king or queen compared to computers. I think my my computer needs an upgrade. Right. I mean, thank you so much, Darlene, and I know that you're working heavily on research, and indeed, this was the job of the SACO, is to start with a baseline to create this bedrock of formal information, so that as sectors and industries, different sectors, creative sectors, can come together and band together around pieces of data and information. And as we move forward, it is good for us to combine our efforts so that we have solid data that we can then move into government, move into the private sector, move into the education sector to lobby for stronger support in key turnkey areas. So the research part is really fundamental, and it's sometimes daunting for people to look at massive amounts of data, but the way we position that data is super critical for the industry. Okay, Nick, over to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. In case anyone didn't know, I'm the current chair and the head of policy at ASA. The two questions, if I recall, was what is the current state of animation, and the other is what are the barriers or weaknesses currently? Is that right, Amy?
Indeed, yes.
Okay, great. So I would always say I'm always very hesitant and very reticent to actually say what I believe the entirety of the industry happens to be, because the truth is that it's all variable and in flux. So it depends on the studio you ask, because some studios are scaling up such that they don't have the requisite skill sets readily available for them to either procure or to recruit in order for them to meet the demand. Others are trying to salvage what little projects they do have and, surviving hand to mouth, on a project by project basis with no scaling opportunities in the near future. Some other studios are actually doing moderately well, but they have some reliable repeat business. So it really is a case by case basis. So I can't really even say what I believe the state of the industry to be, because it depends on the opportunities being afforded to each and every studio operating in the country. And that is going to change, and it's going to change a lot. So even if those who do have a lot of opportunity now and who have more work that they can contend with may not have any in future, maybe after the current slate. So even those who manage to successfully scale and then stagger everything one after the next, they may not be able to do that successfully the next time. So it's always going to vary. In terms of the barriers and weaknesses, I would say that the thing that we're missing most, especially given that we want to encourage a private investment, is a benchmark for locally originated, economically successful projects. So I don't know whether any of you are familiar with Hasbro, which is that giant US toy maker behind G.I. Joe and My Little Pony, but they acquired the production company E1 for about $4 billion in 2019. And that's primarily because of their property Peppa Pig. And it's because of the franchising and merchandising opportunities that came with that property. So there's a lot of money to be made in animation, especially even within the television space. That's why in the policy position, we try to have these regular engagements with the NFVF to encourage them to include in their funding policies to allow for series as well, and offer the same amount of funding for both series that they do for feature films. So I know that there's a lot more prestige in feature film, because anything that's been released theatrically is believed to be where you've made it. That's your red carpet moment. That gets a lot more PR. but it's also very economically viable to be involved in television, and as evidenced by a lot of the different OTT platforms specializing more in series than they do in feature films.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's, of course, the deleterious policies. It doesn't quite matter whether it's the different policy positions that are impacting on bad legislation, regulations, and the various incentives that aren't fit for purpose to encourage more investments in animation, and that aren't honestly going to do what they expect to do. So, for instance, the DTIC, I think in 2018 September, decided that they was going to link broad-based Black economic empowerment to the incentive. So they made it so you needed to be a level 3 contributor in order to access the film incentive. But that precluded then white-owned businesses from making use of the incentive. And they thought, okay, well, and it would be one thing if the reason being is because the money was being depleted year after year by a few white-owned businesses, and there wasn't anything available for anyone else. But that hasn't been the case. I think Treasury makes an allotment of about 350 million rands, and that never gets depleted. So why they made that decision specifically remains a mystery. But ultimately, what it did mean is that a lot of production houses opted to either outsource the work, which means that our South African artists do not get the opportunity to work on those original works. Two, it means that we would lose a lot of the proprietary, so we'd have to cede a lot of the interests and ownership in those projects to someone else. We'd also need, unfortunately, in many cases, some of us actually have to relocate to other nations in order to produce the works there, in order to access the incentives. So, we have to be mindful about what it is we're intending to achieve and whether the policies are aligned with those objectives. And whether, the Copyright Amendment Bill, the Performers Protection Amendment Bill, is concordant with that. Or is it actually going to achieve its stated aims? And the answer is a resounding, vehement no. It's the same thing with the way the 12.0 works in terms of trying to encourage private investment in terms of getting tax write-offs. It doesn't work the way they think it works because it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the day-to-day operations of the way the business works. It's also the lack of high-end skills needed to compete globally because, and this is actually no fault of the studio. So even what Marco was saying earlier about tuition being prohibitively expensive, even the parents who can afford to do that, what we find is that the graduates are not work ready. And that's no fault of their own. And it's not even fault of the schools in some cases because, they try to train journalists to widen their job prospects once they've graduated. So they have to try and give them as many skills as possible. So in other words, they don't have this hyper specialization in any one discipline because, they don't know where the jobs are coming from. So they can't adapt their entire curricula just to go for that area of specialization, which is the kind of thing that we actually do need. Unless we actually do specialize, we're not going to be competitive, especially if you're dealing with film and television. If you're operating within that space, we have to produce the highest premium content. And it is a global marketplace. And South Africa has to compete for attention with the most established industries abroad. So that's a big thing for us. And of course, the last thing is the lack of investment from local broadcasters, at least until recently. In part because there's been no local content quota requirements. There is for children's programming, but not specifically for animation. And so it's easy to sideline animation because it's so expensive, and they can regularly cite that as the reason why they don't. But yeah, these are the main reasons. This is the kind of ecosystem in which we're operating.
I mean, yeah, thank you. So fascinating. And I think as I framed in the beginning, and I do hope everyone heard that, we're dealing with complex systems here where it's not only about the sector, but investments and infrastructure and the way things are set up from a training perspective. We're dealing with legacy education challenges that don't always adapt or have not yet adapted to the reality of technology and the demands of new workplaces and new types of work, indeed. So it really is a fascinating time. But it comes with all of its challenges that almost we have to figure out now and then keep figuring out as we adapt to rapid and radical and increasingly more complex change. And we haven't even hit climate restrictions and sustainability challenges within the sector, the size of files and render farms, and the drain on technology of big creative and high-tech industries. That's something to cover, I think, a little bit later in the conversation. I'd like to maybe just go around now and ask a few questions to each of you.
Amy,
yes.
we've got a hand up from Dr. Tsepo and Kabelo.
Yes, Kabelo. I'm going to hand it over to them right now anyway, because I wanted to ask them about content production and their experience as content producers, especially in a very niche field like the medical field. So I'm just very interested in your experience as content producers and looking at the content side of things, the development, the storyboarding, the IP production side of things, and how you feel about Isabel's comment earlier on that this is really where things are going to be front-loaded in the future. Over to you, and you can ask your question and respond as you see fit.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to, because we're going to talk about medical animation, let me just tell you what we did in the medical industry, because I'm going to be a doctor 30 years next year, a medical doctor. How we were trained is that you are trained as a generalist, right? You become a generalist, because I just want to speak to Nick as a comment about the training of the animators. You're trained as a generalist, and then when you are an intern, you then get exposed to different sectors of the industry, which is what we do at Keblo Studios. We took on that model and we bring it in. So when you come in, you will get exposed to different sectors within animation production, from pre-production to post-production. And then during that time, we then we home in on your skill, your interest, and then we channel you to do that. So we had our very first intern in 2019 who didn't know what she liked in animation, and then we let her go through the internship program with us, and then later on we realized that she was strong in background designing, and now she's a background designer, and that's all she does. So that's what we do as a studio. You come in, we don't let people do coffees and teas and that's it. We home in on your skill so that you don't get bored and you can do this moving forward. So in terms of content creation, and Kabelo, you can add in after I say something, is that when we entered the market, because I came from the medical industry, and the pilot that Kabelo had done was on what does an anesthetist do? And I realized that a lot of people never know what an anesthetist does, which is what I trained in. And so after she created that pilot, I realized animation is a form of communication, is a form of it's something that you can use to communicate, to educate, to market, to advertise to. And then I said, why don't we look at medical animation as an entry point to the market? And in fact, because my networks are there, that's where I come from. And then we after the anesthetist, what does an anesthetist do as a pilot? We then did a pharmaceutical project on some nasal spray that they asked us to do. And then we moved from animation for medical content creation to animation is actually something that you can use to educate. So we have created content for financial education, for agricultural education, and there's other things that you will see that that we will put out there on content creation. So I think for me, animation is more than just a genre. It's a medium of communication. And every time I go to any presentation, I always put text, because I was trained with a lot of text, and then I put animation side by side. And I realized that using animation, people tend to absorb it quicker, because a lot of people are visual learners, and the content that we produce that is visual tend to be retained more. So that's when we then decided that, let's use animation as a communication tool, as an education tool. And I saw that South Korea does that, Japan does that, and in India they also do that. They use animation to educate. And I've had people, even in South Africa, coming to me with, I have a science workbook.
Yeah.
Can you please, because people don't understand the experiments because they have never been in a laboratory, can you maybe turn that into an animation? And then I saw that we can really broaden animation content production beyond just for entertainment, beyond just the movies and so on. We can use it in other areas. And to date, we have created 3 short films on medical content, and next week, Friday, we're releasing our 4th one on mental health, obesity, and diabetes, because this month is World Diabetes Month. So we just really saw this as a useful medium of communication. Do you want to add to what I said?
You said a lot. This panel is all about elevating animation. So for us, in terms of elevating animation, it was about combining it with a different industry. And that is our way of not only making sure we make animation that's functional beyond entertaining, although we do that as well. It was also our way to make sure that our studio has funding to be able to do all the other animation projects that take longer to fund and all of those things. And so if I can just talk to the creation of the medical animation, when you use animation in an industry where they don't understand what animation is, it's a whole other challenge. So they'll come to you, can you make an animation on diabetes? Can I please have it tomorrow? Those are the kinds of requests you get. So there isn't an understanding that animation is not magic or fully computer generated. It really is made by people and requires time. So there's that effort we have to make to educate our clients on what it is that we do in animation before they can actually get the result that they want. But otherwise, it's pretty much the same as any other process of making an animation. We get the concept, we come up with a script for them, we storyboard, the character design, we test the colors, we do the animation, we record the voices, we finish it off, and then it gets distributed according to wherever the client needs to use it. And so that's also the other thing that's unique about using animation in the medical space. You're not making a movie that's going to the cinema or making a TV show that's going to Netflix. Mm-hmm. You're making an animation that will likely live in the hospital on the screen. Get an animation tomorrow. You likely making an animation that's going to live on hospital screen, an animation that needs to be sent on WhatsApp for ease of communication, an animation that's going to be on social media, or some other unique place. So that's also what we are learning is animation, at least in a South African context, needs to be distributed uniquely. If SABC is not asking you to make animated TV shows, then you need to find some other way to get your audience to see it.
And I just wanted to say that with medical animation, I think the most important thing is you have to authenticate the content, because it's not just a story, it's about things that could affect people's lives and behavioral change. So the reason why I'm here at Kebelo Studios to make sure that that content is authenticated.
Yeah.
A good doctor.
Yeah. The number of times she will correct our anatomy sometimes is so frustrating. I'm like, Dr. T, sometimes it's stylized, sometimes it's spaghetti arms, and other times it needs anatomically correct. So but that's the fun part.
And I think your segue about combining an animation industry with something like education, and indeed with the medical industry, it shows just how it can be like such a great puzzle piece that kind of snaps together, where it is the tool and the software and the people and the content and the story, but also it's about the culture that you're trying to influence or change or educate or speak to. And there are so many. As the world gets more complex, we need a simpler way of displaying or mirroring back our society, our culture, our stories. And animation is such a powerful tool to do that. And maybe just to segue and riff on the education line, Marke, as Deputy HOD from WITS, and given your involvement on the Education Committee for Animation SA, how do you think educational institutions can be part of the solution? How do we do this together? How do we elevate the industry together? And are there any initiatives so far that have shown promise? What do we need to focus on and amplify? I'll put that in the chat so that you can also reflect on that.
Okay. Yeah, look, firstly, a disclaimer. I'm not deputy head of any animation department at WITS. I'm deputy head of film and television. No, I mean, it's you didn't really get that wrong, but just to clarify that. But I think, it's an important space that I work closely also sometimes with colleagues from digital art at WITS that are developing also, work that goes into gaming. And I think there's a very, very important initiative there at WITS. I mean, if you're asking about what are interesting initiatives that that could impact the sector, there's a collaboration between the digital art department and engineering, where they have a program that that does a hybrid engineering and digital arts curriculum, and that focuses on game design. And it really is quite amazing what comes out of there. And I mean, I can say my nephew went through that program, and him and some young, they won some prize and they went to New York. They got seed funding, and I think there's this energy about that I think is really important. And it's similar to Dr. Maka and Cabello, what they were saying. I think that kind of understanding of how animation is this very rich set of potentials that can go into information, that can go into medical information, that is also entertaining, that can go into education, that can go into gaming. I think that's really important. So when we see something like what WITS is doing, I think it's really, really an important initiative. At the same time, I think, there's an educational space that has been underestimated, underutilized, and under-supported, which is the occupational qualifications, which sit outside of our universities and colleges, and that can be run as work-integrated programs, that can be run in the workplace, that can be run, as someone asked earlier in the chat, about skills programs. So these occupational qualifications can be run as skills programs, where you build in a very industry-linked way. You build your qualification skills program by skills program until you have a full qualification. And these qualifications can go all the way up to level 8, which is equivalent to an honors degree. Now, I've been working quite hard with colleagues and with the MICT CETA, MICT CETA, and with QCTO, which is the body that governs these occupational qualifications. We've recently, there's been a level 5 qualification, which is kind of a higher certificate level that was finished, that's going to go out for public comment. But we need more, and we need a broader understanding of that occupational qualifications framework, and how it, studios and education institutions and SMMEs can actually use those qualifications, build them into how they operate, and in that way play a part in making animation education more available. Because I think also the way that, sorry, you must stop me if I'm taking too much time, right? So just indicate, because there's a lot to go on about. But
yeah, well, you can close this thought then.
Sure. Let me close on this. There is this, we know that to become accomplished in something like animation, it's not a matter of a few months or even a year. So it's a long process. But one of the barriers to entry into study is that most of the programs that are available are these 4-year or 3-year chunks of your life at great cost. And I think the occupational framework and these skills programs that can be run by independent education initiatives, they offer a way of actually, creating bit by bit access, but also upskilling people who are already in the industry, already in larger or smaller studios or SMME studios, and gradually working their way up formal qualifications. So I think there's a lot of value there, but like I said in the chat, we need to convince the MICT CETA that these qualifications are needed. Then we need to, get on board and create level 4, 6, 7, and 8, and ensure that those are run, at a high standard. I mean, that's just one small piece of the puzzle. There's a lot more that we could have gone into, but I did want to highlight that as well.
Yeah, and I
Thank
think
you.
it's a really important thing to think about, and maybe even worth a deeper dive into what kind of education systems are possible, and how we can adapt the education system to build the skills pipeline, both within the industry and for new entrants into the industry, those who are coming in cold and those who are upskilling as things change radically. And indeed, as Isabel said in the beginning, how do we retrain people already in the industry that are losing their jobs as AI transforms the industry? And this is something we do need to also prepare for. But again, we can't make these decisions without good data. And Delian, I think this is a question for you. I'm going to also put it in the chat in case my signal is not so good anymore. But as I understand, you're running this massive survey on behalf of Animation SA, the Aniverse, seeking data not only from individuals, but also especially training colleges. And I'm just interested to hear what's key insights you've gained so far on the data side. I know you have some data you may even be able to share and speak to. And how can data-driven strategies contribute to innovation? Over to you.
Yeah. Okay, that's a big question. Yeah. Okay. I think just to start with the survey, in terms of data collection, we are finding that okay, I need to just break this into chunks. So when it comes to data collection in the industry, why we've taken the approach that we have and where we are at, I just want to clarify the difference between the research that SACO is doing, for example, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and what we're attempting. So we're trying to do almost a census of this industry. So we've collected information across things like skills, income, ages, the type of employment that someone has, education, and all of that is then mapped in a database that will then allow you to filter and build all kinds of dashboards. So it's very much quantitative, and it will allow you to, at a later stage, then start mapping trends. And so obviously there would be some kind of narrative around a lot of that as your database grows over time, and also as you start benchmarking information to see how the industry changes. But right now, if you can envision the dashboard, it's the first query would pull up a map showing you where different people are located across different ages and skill types. And so that's kind of just to give you an idea of that. One of the things that we found initially is just in terms of response rates. So we instantly got tons of professionals responding immediately. So, and also just to speak to that, if this is useful at all to anyone in the audience, platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter were not successful in our campaigning. And we got quite a high response rate from people in the so professionals, and then also from studios. And it was only when we started doing paid campaigns that we started seeing studios responding. So right now, I won't comment on any of the data segmentation, but what we're just an overview of kind of like the descriptive analytics of the industry. So before we started all of this, we did what we called a market sizing exercise. So essentially, we went on to every platform that you could think of where someone would list themselves. So Facebook, a Google, there are tons. And we essentially went and mapped all of those different individuals in the industry. And we also would split someone. So one person would be an individual working for a company, but they also then sometimes create their own company where they operate as a sole proprietor. So then we started seeing how many companies we're finding versus people working, just to get an idea of where the industry, what we estimate the size of the industry to be. So we got to a rough number of 2,500, but just know that that's really speculation, and that grows as we pick up more data, because we're constantly doing that. But I'll just give you an idea of where those numbers kind of come from. So we got, and this is from the market sizing exercise, about 1,300 individual professionals, and just to caveat this, when I say studios, that includes any sole proprietor. So don't be alarmed by this number. So 500, what we categorized as studios, so registered businesses, 100 academic institutions. And then again, this will all kind of come in the, when we do reporting, but if one studio is based in, so you'll get like a Inscape or something, and they have studios in Cape Town, Pretoria, Durban. So we'll count that a couple of times. So even though it's the same, it's the same studio, but it's not. So we just did that for academic institutions, just to kind of map where in the country you can actually study. And then the students one was really tricky, because students are not as likely to list themselves on a platform necessarily, especially in your earlier years. So we found a couple of students, but we don't necessarily think this number is reflective of the industry. So then we added just like a rough, so we found 120, but we added a rough number of like about, we made that number about 500. So anyways, that brings us to about 2,500. So right now we're trying to push the numbers to get to that estimated number. Okay, sorry, I'm spending a lot of time on just like speaking to where we are and how we got there. What key insights have you gained from your analysis, and how can, okay, and then how can data-driven strategies contribute to its elevation? So I think this is probably the thing that I should have been focusing on, sorry. Being able to benchmark yourself as an individual and a company and an industry as a whole is incredibly important. We've all heard the old adage of data is the new oil. Well, I mean, that is, people say that for a reason. Like I mentioned earlier when I answered the first question, a lot of industries are spending, like if you think about logistics, they're spending up to 400K per month just to get more data about things like, what am I spending on the amount of like fuel versus this versus that versus that, so that they can understand how efficient they are, how they're performing compared to either themselves, internal comparisons versus the industry at large versus, you get the picture. So then you also want to start understanding, so you get all of these different kind of benchmarks that you can do. So like I said, the one for businesses, but then you also want to provide this information to the industry at large, because it's very difficult for industry associations to actually make a decision about which way to go in terms of investment, funding and support, if they don't have data about, is it particular aspect of the industry growing? Are we seeing people leaving the country? You know, these are all the kind of data points that you want to start picking up, and you want to track them over time so that you can, like I said, pick up on trends and eventually start doing more forecasting and understand these movements. Sorry, I hope I answered that question. I think I took really long to get there, so please ask if there's
that was
anything
great.
else.
No, thank you. And I have dropped in the chat for anyone who hasn't taken the survey yet, a link to the Anniverse survey. So if you are here and you are listening, please do start on that and take a look at exactly what, and I hope I'm saying it right, Dillian, is saying. And alluding to, because there are all these segues that you can follow, whether you're an individual, a business, or an education institute, and the survey closes a little bit later this week. Okay, so what I'd like to do now, and I'm conscious that we have 20 minutes, and I want to give the audience some time to feedback. So what I'll do, Nick, maybe if you could just kind of kick off. I know you're here with two hats on, one as the MD of Mind's Eye Creative, but then also as Animation South Africa. And I'm conscious that some of the audience members are going to be producers themselves. Do you want to tackle the question of entrepreneurial perspectives or from the industry perspective? Like, what are the big challenges that you see from more individual producers or smaller companies, and how do we tackle those? And then maybe we can flow from there into an open discussion from the floor, and any questions that anyone might have about any of the discussion so far, and indeed the survey, which is so important. I think this is the topic. We need data in order to elevate the industry, and there is an opportunity now to feed that data into animation South Africa. Nick?
Yeah, sure. So insofar as it relates to animation businesses, my position has always been it depends on their working model. So for those who are an outsourced solution, especially from, as your own research at SACO indicates, Europe and America, it's mostly going to be the lack of available service work. So if that's going to be a big issue, if for some reason, like during COVID, that's going to be diminished, especially if they're working in marketing or communications, then that is going to be negatively and adversely impacted. And that is going to be something that's going to hurt them in the short and medium term, assuming that they can even survive the pandemic. That's one way. The second is if you work in film and television, one of the big issues is that it's very difficult to put together a finance plan, especially if the incentive isn't accessible to you, or even in cases where it is, it may be prohibitively expensive because you have to compound all of your total production expenditure with the completion bond, which is 3% of your TPE. It's also that you have to include 15% VAT if the supplier is a VAT vendor. So that is going to increase your total costs. And for the most part, you may not necessarily be able to get that back because the suppliers with which you work may not themselves be VAT vendors. And so, they won't charge VAT, but they won't be able to mitigate your VAT liability either. So that's just going to be a hard spend in terms of taxation. And all of these kinds of things combined makes it so that it's sometimes even less expensive for you to not bother making use of the incentive than it is and just simply be a service solution. And all of those kinds of things actually become a major problem. It's also, like I've mentioned before, trying to find sales agents and distributors to give you an indication on projections, and people who can do so in a way that is likely to be the case. So people have a prior track record. They've worked in this specific discipline for this format, for this kind of show with this target demographic in these regions. If we can get people who are more experienced in that in the country, especially in animation, that would probably be for the best. But that's one of the biggest obstacles, because we have to, when we're looking for private investment, prove economic merit. So that's going to be a massive issue for those working in film and television. That's always a massive stumbling block. Yeah, and so apart from that, it's just having the kind of experience and expertise that you can deal with that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's also the dearth of work opportunities. So if and where there are scarcities, those studios are going to struggle. But if a boom in those specific markets, then those people are going to experience the boom and rise with the tide. So yeah, it does depend. Every single studio is going to experience the world differently.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, this is like one of the challenges, right? We don't operate production line in the same as like a motor vehicle assembly line or a fashion production line. Everything is unique, and there's so many unique smaller players across the business. I'm very interested to see if anyone wants to comment from the floor, and I understand we've got like 10 or 15 minutes to go. So can I get a raised hand from any of our attendees who would like to comment or ask a question?
We've got a raised hand from Vuyo.
Please open the floor to Vuyo. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you for the opportunity. With me being in a rural community and having a challenge working in class with learners, I've realized that we need to really consider animation as a subject. And according to Doc Mock here, listening to him, I find that we need to cascade this conversation into our Department of Education, especially the basic education, because we are sitting with a group of learners that do not have a concentration span. But if you look at the visual space, they are able to comprehend with it and actually relate to it. So I think this conversation also needs to go to the level of education, of the Department of Education, and see how does it get to buy into the program. And with the CETA part of it being seeing that also, how do we cascade it to actually meet the general education certificate idea that is coming on board from grade 9, because I think that's where we are going to find ourselves with a whole lot of critical skills that will be needed, especially as we are moving to for IR. Thank you.
Thank you, Vuyo. Does anyone want to respond to that? Or we could take another question from the floor if there is anybody that wants to raise their hand in the meantime.
You've got another hand, Amy.
Could you let them in, please, Marcy? Thanks.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to ask Mock about the Kliptown initiative, a little bit more about it, because he was mentioning that it's more than just institutions that need to be involved in order to grow things.
Fantastic. I think, Maka, these are two questions or comments from you. It's like, I guess on one hand, how do we flow, or more about Kliptown, please? And then number two is, how do we get this conversation around animation into the Department of Education, especially basic, but all the way up? And what needs to be done, like both as animation as a tool for learning and animation as a career?
Wow. Yeah, thanks for that. Look, the Kliptown initiative, that's something that is very closely linked to a cultural arts and culture organization in Kliptown that I'm also a member of. We also kind of serve greater Eldorado Park area, and we're also linked with other community initiatives there. And the approach there was to say, look, there are already trusted members of the community that are part of these initiatives. So let's work with them and work in a way that is very cognizant of the needs and the context of the specific communities. So to the extent that this process can be scaled and replicated, it needs to be replicated in the way that the first question is, what is the context and what is needed? So what we did is we involved 2 cohorts, one cohort of kids from about 6 to 14, another cohort of 14 to, I think the oldest is 27. And we started with basic animation techniques. We didn't have budget, but also I think within recognition of the context, it's like nobody there has got a computer at home, none of our participants, not one of them. Very few of them even have got the kind of smartphones that can host, apps that can help with animation. So we said, okay, so we'll start working on paper. And this is not to say that we're not going to impart digital skills, but it's to say, let's work in ways that people can take the work home. The participants can, don't need any capital outlay and so on. And I think we've made huge strides. I don't know if I'll be able to share my screen. Would I be able to very, very quickly?
I think you are able. I think you are able to. Otherwise, Masi can give you.
Host has disabled screen sharing.
Host.
Okay, you should be able to. I will fix it.
There we go. There we go. There we go. Okay, so I'll just quickly show you what we were able to get participants working on. This is somebody who is here's somebody who did a walk, a character walk, not just any walk cycle. This is not from a textbook. I don't know if you can see it. This is not this is not working from a textbook at all. This is having developed physically a character. How is this character going to walk, and then drawing it. A number of the participants were able to do these kind of things. I mean, it's tricky. This is the kind of thing that university students kind of start out. We did some stop frame and so on. So it's really, really advanced and stuff for first entrance into animation. And I think that from here, we go into storytelling, into character, and eventually I can see us, within a year being able to make short films from basically, people who have had an interest in art, but there's no art in schools. There is no support structures, as one would hope. There isn't even, in Kliptown and Eldos, there isn't really, besides our initiative, there isn't really a functional community art center. There are some interesting initiatives like Kliptown Youth Program and so on. Anyway, so that just gives you a little bit of a sense of what we've been doing. I think, what we've done, I think we've only been running for workshops twice a week for 2 hours for about 6-7 weeks. But the response has been absolutely incredible. And I think this is something that we want to develop the model. We want to document it thoroughly. And then we say, how do we roll out and replicate and create really a network of partnerships where we connect all of these initiatives? So it's part of really quite a big vision. And I think it can be quite transformative. And of course, we have to take into account the advances, technological advances, like for instance with AI. So how do these kind of skills that one can develop in that kind of context benefit also from advances in AI rather than being, trained towards redundancy? So there's a lot of interesting questions around this. It's part of my PhD. So I'm hoping to thoroughly study this. So sorry, I hope I haven't taken too much time, but I think it was important to answer that question properly. Thank you.
No, 100%. And I think these are exactly the kinds of examples of pilot projects or ideas that can be scaled over time, but getting it right is, where you start small and build up into a curriculum that doesn't need to necessarily be hosted by big institutions, but can be hosted and run by smaller institutions. I see in the chat that Isabel mentioned the Artists in School program, which is also a great way for people to share skills. And then Linda Lani also noted that, how do we use computers that are in public libraries for these training programs? And it's such an interesting question about how do we deal with the barrier to software access and price in the public space and access to technology in public spaces. You can respond, Marco, if you want to.
Oh, never mind.
So sorry, I see
Hi everyone. Just have a camera.
You're back.
Oh, can I carry on?
Yes.
There we go. I just have the camera off because Uncle load shedding. So we might be a little bit delayed. I just wanted to just comment on what's been said about all of these initiatives that have been shared. This is what I mean by coming up with solutions that are appropriate for African problems. Because I do find that in a lot of these discussions, we will talk and it's almost as if we're modeling after other industries that have existed, that have solved for their own issues. And while we can admire them and learn from them, we really do have to solve problems for our own continent, for our own country. And so just that Clip Town, there we go, Clip Town as an example of just, we're trying to solve a South African issue in a South African way. And I think that's the thinking that needs to be brought into these kinds of discussions. Don't try and copy the Americans or the Japanese or the Irish. Try and find a South African solution for a South African problem.
Indeed, and this is how you help build marketplaces with local demand around key issues. And indeed, our lessons could be other people's lessons in the future. I'm very conscious of our 2 minutes that we have left. So I wanted to ask if there were any burning questions from the floor. And I think I put it in the group a number of times. Please take that Universe survey link and share it as widely as you can within your network, and take part if you can, but also share it, because this kind of data can enable our next round of decision making and indeed help Animation SA lobby in the right direction and advocate using data as a key tool. Any burning questions?
Amy, we have a hand from Greenworks that's been up for a while.
Sorry, Greenworks, please go ahead.
Okay, Green Unk Works. Okay, so it's quite a quick question, but I hope it doesn't open a can of worms. But it's basically the issue. Well, first of all, I need to commend the work being done by everybody. I think there's a lot of positive energy. There's a lot of work being done, but a lot of support is still needed from various sectors. But my question is really about, given the challenges in the sector, is there any kind of brain drain that people may have noticed, those with regards to this sector, people basically saying, there's better opportunities somewhere else, and how do we curb that? So that's the double question. Is there a brain drain and how do we curb it?
I think, Nick, can you take this question, please?
Yeah, you bet. So a brain drain, absolutely. What happens is that you don't even necessarily need to emigrate, although that there are a number of professionals who are emigrating to greener shores, where work is more readily available, especially in the kinds of work that people, artists choose to do, and that's mostly film and television. So there's a lot of brain drain there, but it's also happening, especially since the advent of COVID, but probably definitely before, because they had already developed all of that IT infrastructure, enabling people to work in virtual studios. But it happens that there are foreign studios or production houses or different businesses within animation who are poaching our local professionals, getting them to work on their projects from within the country. So they're working within South Africa, but on somebody else's work that belongs to somebody in a different country. And we ultimately lose them either permanently or for a prolonged period of time. So that kind of thing is unfortunately happening. Brain drains, you know, they're not unique to animation, but it just so happens that where we as studios fail to successfully stagger projects to create the continuity that creates sustainability for professionals as a full-time occupation, and not just an intermittent thing that independent contractors experience all the time, they're likely to go to places where they, you know, they have a slate of projects reliably booked back to back for the next 5 years. So yeah, that does happen.
Yeah, it is tricky, and I think, you know, there's a localization policy, but there's also a lot of value in a global outlook and understanding global industry and being part of it. And the balance there is well, it's how we find that balance that is critical, because we don't operate independently. Although, as our team Marco was saying, we do have a responsibility to, and an inclination to, solve local problems that can have the potential on a global stage. Friends, animators, gamers, we have run out of time, but I think that was a really great conversation, and very thought-provoking, touching on some of the big issues of the day. From a forward-moving perspective, data is key for both the observatory and for the for Animation South Africa, and really we're in this data collection cycle right now, so please help us share the survey as widely as you possibly can. We'll also share the outcomes of this meeting, and then it is worth it once we're going into a publication phase or a results phase. We will share the information that's come out from the survey broadly. I know Animation will support them as the observatory in getting the findings out. And as I understand it, this is just the beginning of data collection for decision making for Animation South Africa. Isabel, would you, if you're still in the room, would you like to just have some closing words, and we will share information outcomes with you? Over to you, Isabel, if Masi can unmute you.
Hi. I was actually just giving a little last minute note in the chat box around membership fees. Industry organizations really require that membership fees to be able to cover all of the costs that get incurred in being able to implement and run some of the projects, especially our website, social media sites, etc. So I really want to encourage everyone. I was just going through the membership list and see a lot of expired membership. So to encourage people to renew their membership. But I'd love to thank SACO for working with us on this. Getting this information out there is really important. And that's one of the things that we are ramping up as Animation SA is, you know, being a volunteer-driven organization for so many years meant we just get on with doing the job, and actually communicating everything that we do has fallen through the cracks. So a lot of people are not aware of the amount of work that Animation SA does in the background. So initiatives and discussions like this are so key in making our community aware of all that, you know, is possible and that we can do. And then also encouraging volunteerism. You know, this is how we drive our industry forward, how we make a difference in our sphere of influence, is by putting our hands up and saying, you know, of all the different initiatives, this is where, you know, what I'm passionate about and how can I put my stamp on that. So I really want to encourage people to volunteer their time and their skills. And then, of course, we have the board succession coming up, which is really critical, finding a really strong, powerful board that will be able to open up a lot of doors for us as an industry, will really help us just be more impactful. So really encouraging everyone to vote and select really great board members. And yeah, looking forward to all of the potential and possibilities that are ahead of us. So thank you everyone for joining. This was a really great discussion.
Thank you, everyone. Really great. And then just as a note, we have recorded this, so we will load it on the Observatory YouTube,
they will give access to Animation South Africa as well, so they will have the ability to put it on their channels, and I think we'll also then share it potentially on our social channels as well. So please follow the South African Cultural Observatory and Animation SA, pay your dues, be part of the industry. Please take the survey. We're asking a lot of you, but we need you. We are the industry together, and the only way we can elevate it is to do so together. Thank you, everyone. Have a happy Monday.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you
Bye.
so
Thank you,
much.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, SACO. Thanks, ASA. Bye.